So there's a passage of scripture that, as a pastor, I'd read hundreds of times, but in 2022, for some reason, I'm reading this passage and it just literally stops me in my tracks. And I've spent a couple of years really reflecting and meditating on this passage in 1 Thessalonians 4, and it's verse 11 and 12. And so I want to read it, and then I want to spend a little time unpacking it, and we can talk about it. Paul says, to make it your ambition to lead a quiet life, you should mind your own business, work with your hands, just as we told you, so that your daily life may win the respect of outsiders, and so that you'll not be dependent on anybody. And so for me, this has now become sort of like God's strategy or formula for influence. And it's different than what we might normally think. So I want to build this formula through these couple of verses. So Paul begins by saying, make it your ambition. So I want you to stop right there for a little bit. Because the word ambition is not used hardly ever in the New Testament. Only used 2 other times than where it is right here. But as I said earlier, I'm convinced we need a much stronger and more developed theology of ambition. So the first part of this formula for ambition is GA, which I would say is godly ambition. Godly ambition. But what is ambition? You can't see it, you can't smell it, you can't taste it, but every person in this room, because you are all leaders, you know that it's real, and you know the power of ambition, and you know how important it is in your own life. And so when I began to think a lot about this, I decided to go and look up the definitions of ambition. And I decided that none of them did justice to the word ambition. So I wrote my own definition. Maybe we'll see it in a dictionary someday. Who knows? But here's my definition of ambition. It is a sustained, preoccupying, driving, intense desire to achieve something. Let me say it again. Ambition is a sustained, it isn't fleeting, it's preoccupying, because when you're ambitious about something, you just keep coming back to it again and again, and it's like your ambition controls you rather than you control your ambition. It's driving, it pushes you to action, it pushes you to be willing to sacrifice, it pushes you to do hard things, so it drives you forward, and it's intense desire. There's passion and unrelenting desire, and it's always targeted toward accomplishing something or achieving something. And I believe that you have this dichotomy of people who are natural leaders, that when they talk about ambition, it's always on the success and growth side of the equation. And then you have people who live in the world of soul care who almost throw rocks at ambition, right? And one of the problems I had early on as I was in the world of soul care is nobody who wrote about soul care was a church leader. Yeah. They were all authors or seminary professors. Yeah. And so I go, I get that, but it's pretty clear like you're not a leader. That's right. So I felt like, no, ambition actually comes from God, and the ambition that drives us as leaders comes from the Lord. It doesn't just reside in the type A driver personalities. I think it resides in all of us. Some of us have it, though, more on steroids than others, right? But when it is managed by the Spirit and God directed, it can bear tremendous fruit. And I look at the world, London is such a fascinating city. And you look around at what's been built around this city, and you go, some ambitious people built some stuff around here with very primitive tools and amazing craftsmanship, ambitious people. And some of those things still stand today, right? And I go, it's a testimony to ambition. And if you are a leader, you know what it is to have ambition coursing through your veins. And to dream about what God could do in your local community through your church and through you as a leader. I want my life to count. And so all of us know what that's like. So here's my statement. We are hardwired to be pursuers. We go after things we value and we chase after that which we love. And the gospel would not have gone to places where it's gone to if there had not been ambitious people who said, I am willing to sacrifice for the gospel. Yeah. Or for you guys to go, I know it's not easy to build a church in Europe, but God has called me and I have a godly ambition about chasing after that which I love. The ancient church fathers used to refer to this. They didn't use the word ambition. They called it a fire in the belly. But I think this is a really important statement for us to get clear on. Humility and ambition are not polar opposites. They can and they should coexist. True humility does not squash my ambition, but it does provide direction and guardrails for my ambition. So I was thinking about this when I was writing this talk, and I thought, where in Scripture do you see like ambition put on display? Well, I go to Philippians 3 when Paul, I think this passage is dripping with ambition when he says, I don't consider myself yet having taken hold of it in Philippians 3. One thing I do, forgetting what is behind, straining toward what is ahead, I press on toward the goal to win the prize for which God called me heavenward in Christ Jesus. I go, all right, that's ambition. That's godly ambition. But ambition, you'll see this in your notes if you're taking notes, is like nitroglycerin. It better be handled carefully. Because nitroglycerin is an active ingredient in dynamite, and it's also an active ingredient in heart medicine. So depending on its usage, it can either be destructive or can be productive. It can be explosive and blow stuff up, or it can be very, very helpful. And when I left Saddleback, one of the things that surprised me is how much in that season coming off of that chaotic, crazy-making season, that God shined the light as I would spend time with God and be alone, and sometimes I'd be confused. The thing that God shined the spotlight on the most was the issue of my ambition. And I would not describe my ambition as godly ambition. I would describe it now, looking back, as unhealthy ambition. And if you peel back all the layers of stuff going on in my life, down deep, there was a deep unhealthiness, and that was around this issue of ambition. And the Holy Spirit shined the issue on ambition and revealed to me that a lot of my ambition really was selfish ambition. And that beneath, even though I often wrapped it in God talk and vision language, that what resided underneath it was a desire to be known, a desire to be seen as a success. And if I go back to my family of origin, this low-grade, compelling need to be enough. And I think for a lot of leaders, that's where they live. And again, doesn't mean we can't have healthy ambition, but I think for the first time, I was really willing to look at what drove me, and that a lot of it wasn't healthy. And so I want to make a statement that I think is pretty strong, but I really believe it's valid. I think selfish ambition has wreaked far more havoc in the Church of Jesus Christ than moral failure ever has. Wow. I think egocentric, selfishly motivated leaders have done way more damage than the number of pastors who've had affairs or stolen money or been unethical. Because often ambition, even unhealthy ambition, gets patted on the back. But there's a dark side to our ambition that I think we have to be honest about. And so here's an analogy. I remember reading a few years ago a book by a Catholic priest. His name was Ronald Rolheiser, and he wrote about, it's called The Holy Longing. And in it, he talks about ambition being like raw electricity. And so you think about raw electricity, it's full of potential and power, and it's energetic and it's alive. But his thing is, if left by itself, raw electricity will do a lot of damage. And it's only when you connect it to a transformer that now all of that energy and potential is now channeled and directed in a healthy way, and it now becomes godly. And so What I would say is there has to be the transformer of humility and a healthy soul. Otherwise, your ambition is going to get out of whack, right? So godly ambition must be connected to the transformer of humility. So I don't know if you guys have ever read this little book, but I love this great little book. It's called Hudson Taylor's Spiritual Secret. So Hudson Taylor, the founder of the China Inland Mission, took the gospel to much of China. And a leader from the church in Scotland said to Hudson Taylor one day, "You must sometimes be tempted to be proud because of the wonderful way God has used you. I doubt if any man living has had greater honor." And Hudson Taylor's response was, "On the contrary, I often think that God must have been looking for someone small enough and weak enough for him to use, and that he found in me." Wow. I go, that's to me the transformer of humility. All right, before we move off of this, I want to take you to a verse in James 3, verse 16, because I think this is a universal axiom. Because James says, wherever you have envy and selfish ambition, just mark it down. You're going to find disorder and every evil practice. There's going to be dysfunction and lack of health whenever selfish ambition takes over. It's always going to be the case. So when ambition, and this is Lance's testimony. When ambition comes off the rails, we make ourselves the object of our ambition rather than God. And the result is we shrink our souls, our vision gets blurred, we begin to see people in a utilitarian way for what they can do for us, and we become the hero of our own story. I don't know about you, but when I even just say it, like, that is sobering to me. So Paul says, make it your ambition, but just make sure your ambition is a godly ambition. But then when I go on in the passage, I'm like shocked and underwhelmed by what Paul says next. I thought Paul would say, make it your ambition to be a world changer, or impact your community, or grow a big church, or lead a lot of people to Jesus. He says, no, make it your ambition to what? Lead a quiet life. Really, Paul? That's so anticlimactic. That's all you've got. That's where I'm going to channel my ambition. So it brings me, though, to the second part of the formula. So godly ambition plus QL, quiet life. Again, interestingly, this Greek word for the phrase quiet life is only used in a couple of other places in the New Testament, in Luke 14, Acts 11, and in Luke 23, this same word is translated as rest, which is interesting. So Paul challenges us to be ambitious to lead a quiet life. So here's the question I've been reflecting on. What if you and I put our very best energy and our ambition and our focus and tenacity into leading a really great, everyday, quiet life? Like, what if I put my energy into leading a quiet life? And by the way, I think that would help curb my selfish ambition, because there is no notoriety or celebrity or ego in living a quiet life. It's marked by humility. But we live in a culture where everybody wants to be great, and I don't know if you guys use these phrases in the UK or in Ireland, but in the States, you hear things like, make a difference, leave your mark, make your life count, go big or go home is a popular one, right? And here's my conclusion, and it's in your notes. In our relentless pursuit to be extraordinary, we have minimized the power of the ordinary. So I say this when I teach to church teams. What if, instead of you trying to grow the number of followers you have on Instagram, or what if, instead of you trying to be epic, how about if you just crush Tuesday? How about if you just nail Thursday? Like, what if we just got back to living really great, daily, simple lives? And so I thought, what if you had quiet life on your computer and it was a drop-down menu? Like, what does that look like in everyday life? So I want to give you 3 phrases that I think flesh out what a quiet life looks like practically. Number 1, I would say, is we relax in obscurity. we relax in obscurity. It is amazing how many times in the Gospels Jesus uses the word not or nothing when talking about himself. He says in John, in myself I can do nothing. I do not please myself. I do not accept praise from men. I came down from heaven not to do my will. I do nothing on my own. I am not seeking glory for myself. So here's Jesus as the Son of God says, yeah, I'm not after glory for me. Not motivated by selfish ambition. In fact, I always feel like when I read the Gospels, Jesus is the anti-celebrity Messiah. He never chases after the spotlight or the crowds. In fact, interesting, if you've never read I'll give you another great book to read. Anonymous is the name of the book by Alicia Britt Chole, C-H-O-L-E. She's a very gifted writer. And in it, she talks about how Jesus really lived a life of obscurity. And we think about it, other than when he was born and when he was 12, we really don't know much for the first 3 decades, right? It's like, what was he doing when he was 14 or when he was 23 or 28? You'd almost think Jesus was ambitious to lead a quiet life. Because for the first 3 decades, we really don't know much about him at all, right? So relax in obscurity. And I remember in my first church, pastoring a small church, coming out of seminary, full of vision and ambition, thinking I'm going to grow a mega church in this town of 3,000 in a rural community where I lived. So arrogant. And after 5 years of being there and the glory and vision of my grandiose ideas had degenerated into the hard work of pastoring a rural congregation. And I wanted out. I really wanted out. And I remember I applied to churches and got turned down. I remember one day I got another call from a church and go, yeah, we just think you don't have enough experience. You're too young to come pastor our church. And I just remember sitting at my desk just weeping. And here's the phrase that came to my mind. I wanted to be sought out. I didn't want to be left out. Wow. And obscurity was not part of my plan. And I think when you are a young, ambitious leader, obscurity is a hard pill to swallow. And I think part of it is we've made it difficult because we have celebrated only things that are big and growing and all the numbers are up and to the right. Yeah. Yeah. And so we have put external fruitfulness under the spotlight and sometimes unintentionally minimized faithfulness, right? Yeah. And so what I would look back now to young leaders and say is, obscurity is actually good for you. I know it's hard. And you want the spotlight or you want to be known or you want to be asked to speak at this thing. But it's like, just take a deep breath and just relax. Obscurity's okay. And the second phrase I would give you to describe what I think quiet life looks like is embrace rest. When I think of a quiet life, I think of a life at peace, not exhausted, not striving, not frantic. I think of the invitation of Jesus in Matthew 11 when he says, come to me, I know you're beaten, exhausted, you're buried under the demands of life. But if you'll take my yoke, I'll show you the way of life that includes rest. And so Frederick Bruner, a New Testament scholar, I like what he says about a yoke. He says, a yoke is a work instrument. When Jesus offers a yoke, he offers what we might think tired workers need least. They need a mattress or a vacation, not a yoke. But Jesus realizes that the most restful gift he can give the tired is a new way to carry life, a fresh way to bear responsibilities. Instead of offering escape, Jesus offers equipment. Wow. I love that. And I look back on my life and I go, part of my journey of coming out of Saddleback is I needed different equipment for how to do life. To go back to what Rich was saying earlier, I didn't know anything about boundaries, limits, rest, margin, Sabbath. None of that was even in my vocabulary. And probably one of the biggest game changers of my life over the last 20 years is trying to learn how to understand and embrace this practice of Sabbath. And I think there's a biblical rhythm. Sam, I would say this to you, kind of what you said earlier. There is a biblical rhythm that I'm trying to work really hard to embrace. And it's this: work really hard and then unplug really hard. I think some of our team don't feel rested because they halfway work and they halfway rest. And the biblical model is get after it. Like work when you're on the clock, when you're doing your ministry, work really hard. But then when you're unplug really hard. Yeah. And I get it. Occasionally the ox gets in the you've got to re-engage work. But man, what if most of the time our pattern was we worked really hard and then unplugged really hard? And I just want to make one other comment on this. When I came out of Saddleback and I started trying to practice Sabbath and rest, I actually hated it. Because one, I was such a workaholic that I didn't know how to have fun or do anything fun outside of work. But also I discovered is that my internal RPMs were redlining, or my engine was racing internally, even if I was trying to slow down externally. And it took me probably 3 years to get to a place where I could feel like, oh, my soul is actually resting along with my body. And so if you're a driver personality, when you go to rest, sometimes it feels really challenging and hard. But I would tell you it's worth fighting for to get to that place where you actually can experience that deep shalom and peace and rest. All right. Oh, I want to make one other. God has a surefire strategy for helping you begin to slow down and embrace rest. You want to? It's 2 words: getting old. And I just want to look to all you young guys in the room. It's coming for you. You're not going to be exempt. So, all right. The third little drop down is pursue simple. We don't spend much time here, but have you noticed life drifts toward complexity, right? It doesn't drift toward simplicity. So here's a great statement from Hans Hoffman. The ability to simplify means eliminating the unnecessary so that the necessary may speak. How do I order my daily life so that it's a quiet life and it removes the clutter and complexity? All right, one final thing and we'll break for lunch. GA, godly ambition, plus quiet life, plus HD is head down. Notice Paul's statement in verse 11. Mind your own business, work with your hands. What gives your life and my life moral authority and spiritual authority is not an inspiring sermon or a well-produced weekend service. It is the mundane daily habits and practices of our everyday life. And I've got to learn the discipline of the daily. That's why I love that statement from Tish Warren. The crucible of our formation is the anonymous monotony of our daily routines. Wow. I go, if I had lasered in on this 25 years ago, I could have saved myself so much pain. And so, again, we won't spend time here, but as a younger leader, I was always looking for more opportunity, more leadership, more influence. I wish some older guy my age now would have put their arm around my shoulder and go, Lance, just relax. Like, just be faithful with what God has put in your hand today and leave the results up to Him. And then the last word I want to fill in for you is GA, godly ambition plus quiet life plus head down equals influence. Look at verse 12. So that your daily life may win the respect of outsiders and you won't be dependent on anybody. Isn't that amazing? Wow. It's like Paul goes, you want a new evangelism strategy? How about if we just start living great daily lives and then we'll win the respect of the outsiders that are around us? And that's what we're about, right? I mean, part of the reason you guys are in this room is because you believe in having an outward-facing church. That it matters, our evangelism matters, and reaching people for Christ matters. And Paul goes, what if maybe one of the great ways we reach people with the gospel is we start living great daily lives, and then we see our influence increase.